Hey everyone, wherever you are, I hope you're having a wonderful week so far. We're here with the latest episode of the Inside Crypto Show, interviews and discussions with regular people just like yourselves. Today, we're joined by Alex Vergara, who leads EarthFund's community team, which is responsible for growing an engaged global community of people that want to help fund big ideas with the potential to change the world. That's amazing. Before we get started talking about EarthFund, we have to chat about Alex's background. Alex, welcome. Thank you so much for making time in your evening. Tell us about yourself.
Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to be on the podcast. So I have a very diverse background, let's say. I was in like the health and wellness and fitness industry for a long while. I also have a background in marketing, digital paid ads, and everything as far as like traditional marketing, event coordinating, organizing, all that good stuff. And then I started, since I could remember, I've been really into technology and software and hardware and just like taking hardware apart the moment I got my hands on it since I was, I don't know, like 6, 7 years old, getting in trouble with my mom because of it. So I've been in a little bit of everywhere, and I've really always enjoyed spending quite a bit of time of figuring out how things work and how can I improve them myself and how I can add value to it. So yeah, so that's a little bit about me personally, and we'll get more into the more exciting part, which is EarthFund, but it's just who I am and what I've been doing up to this point.
Like you mentioned, like how to improve things. Like that's not a natural tendency for a lot of people. Like where does that come from? Was it parental influence? Was it just an inner drive to improve things? Where did it start?
Yeah, a big part of it is internal in the sense of I always want to improve myself. I'm always asking people for feedback, right? And not obsessively or anything. Just I want to know what I can do better, how I can be a better communicator. That's a big one for me, and how I can improve personally. And then from there, you just start going outward, right? I guess everything starts from the inner path and then it moves outward. I got into the fitness industry and it's like, how could I be a better coach? How can I cue people better? How can I teach people better? How can I help them remember what's important better? And then it started getting into mentoring people and how can I mentor people better? And how can I make sure that people are on a better path? And then it started getting into technology and blockchain and how can we raise funds better? And how can we allow people to have a better voice in the things they actually care about? And that's how this Earth Fund idea came to. Obviously, I'm not the only person. I'm one of many co-founders that made this project happen, but it's just one of those drives that brought us all together. It's something that we all really had a passion for.
Nice. And you created the segue. Let's get into it in a minute after I did the obligatory disclaimer. Anything said by you or myself does not constitute financial or legal advice. Our opinions are our own, not to be connected with our respective organizations. Everyone who's listening or watching, please do your own research.
Please do your own research. Always.
Yes.
Always do your own.
So, Alex, economy is good or bad, depending what, I guess, maybe on the political spectrum where you land on it. There's a lot of different opinions about it. I mean, pretty much globally. Even here in Taiwan, people are like, yeah, things are going well. Oh, no, things are not going well. So I think funding has been a big issue. And one of the things when I was doing research for this podcast, I'm like, look, oh, you guys are funding a lot of very cool things, very important things. And given the nature of the global economy, I think it's very important to have places where you can turn to for funding. But before we get started, you've already mentioned Earth Fund a few times, I think 5 times already. Can you give us a very broad overview for people who might be like me? Like when I heard about Earth Fund, I'm like, okay, environment, but actually it's a bit more than that. So tell us about it.
Yeah, that's something that off bat everybody's like, oh, Earth Fund is about the environment. It's a nonprofit, it's a charity. And that's actually not the case at all, right? Earth Fund is a software company that built a platform to help onboard, let's say, nonprofits and philanthropists who want to change the world. Now, that's a very vague term. What does that mean? And like you said, depending on what side of the political spectrum you're on, it could be a very different definition, which is where we find ourselves in our world today. But yeah, we're providing the tools for companies to come into Web3, to raise funds using cryptocurrency, to allow people to have a decentralized autonomous organization within their charity so that individuals have a say in what's going on, to build Web3 communities. And that's just the beginning. It's just the tip of the iceberg. But it's really about empowerment, right? It's about, okay, perhaps we have a shaky economy right now or a great economy, depending on how you look at it. Like you said, we believe the Earth Fund mentality, and also personally, I believe this is the time to build things for the future, right? To really say, okay, where's the future headed? Where's technology headed? Where's sentiment headed? And where are individuals going mentally? And it just became the clear next thing. So people want a bigger say in what they do. They want more ownership. People are working more remote in jobs. Just not too long ago, if we were to do a podcast, you and I would be in the same studio talking, right? And here we are on completely different sides of the planet. And we're having this conversation. It's morning time where you are and it's nighttime where I am. And our connection is crypto, right? And blockchain and everything Web3 technology. And we want to allow, when we are empowering nonprofits to use that same connection, that same borderless donation funding and raising and giving in order to continue on their legacy.
Nice. That's very interesting, and like a whole bunch of questions were popping up in my mind. And I guess like when I was looking at your site, I guess I want to start off with this is, let's say I'm a Taiwanese nonprofit, right? And I'm like, okay, this is really cool. I'm listening to this and I want to use the software available on EarthFund, right? Roughly speaking, could you walk our listeners and viewers like through the process of getting and starting with EarthFund's software?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest thing about coming into the world of Web3 is there's a technical barrier to entry. You have to have some type of technical understanding of what Web3 is to build out DAOs, to get ENS domains, to do all of this stuff. And we could get into it. The really smart people like talking about it all the time, right? But really, we're seeing that this blockchain Web3 crypto technology is, if it's going to be for, and I like saying all those words interchangeably, if it's going to be for the masses, if we're really going to have mass adoption for this, that just can't be the case. It has to be simple. It has to be Instagram simple. Everybody knows how to use Instagram. Everybody knows how to use an Apple product. You can give it to an 80-year-old and within 2 days, they're semi-pros at it. I have a great aunt that's 91 that uses her iPhone and she's better than most people I know.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. But that's how you get to mass adoption. So with that being said, that's always been the driver for EarthFund, making sure that all the words that are on the website, right, from a marketing perspective are easy to read and understand. But more importantly, from a user experience perspective and an interface perspective, what people use to make it easy, just to be a couple of clicks and then they get the end result that they like. With that being said, the most challenging part about starting a DAO for a nonprofit would be, believe it or not, creating a MetaMask wallet. And a lot of people listening have done that already. And it's not that difficult, right? You have to be a little brave to do it. No pun intended. It's just a tiny bit. After you have your MetaMask wallet, the rest is as easy as 2 clicks and you can create your DAO. You can have your charitable donation page already built out for you on the EarthFund platform. You have your ENS subdomain. You have your EarthFund subdomain. You have a community site. You have a multi-signature wallet. You have treasury management. And all of this is just done with a couple clicks. So it really is eliminating all of that technical complications for these nonprofits to hop on board.
That is impressive. I'd seen the docs and stuff, and I always tell people on the podcast, it's much more different. You hear it coming from someone as opposed to reading something on a website. And the impact of you just telling me that stuff is much more significant. And I guess my next question would be, and you can clarify, you living that side of the world. I used to live in Massachusetts like 20 years ago, right? I haven't lived in the West in a good long time. I've lived in like the last 14 years, but I know when it comes to, philanthropy, I would never remember how to say this.
That's right.
Is here, like a lot of people are very skeptical about it. They're like, okay, I'm giving money to the Red Cross or I'm giving money to UNICEF. And again, these are not strictly, but like Western organizations that most people who have lived in the West know about. But okay, and then I don't know where this money is going. So is that this is what I've always, when I've talked to Taiwanese people or Korean people when I used to live in Korea, they were like, okay, I want to track where this money is going. And I guess as a DAO, right, with EarthFund, right, one of the coolest things that you guys are enabling philanthropic organizations to do is to say, hey, this is what we're doing with your money, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, precisely. And that's one of the big things. That's part of the democratization of charitable giving, of the giving economy. Now, that in itself is not democratizing, but it's creating transparency. And sunlight is the best medicine for doubt. I hear this all the time, especially because people hear about what I do, right? And you hear it all the time where it's, I want to give more, but I'm concerned that when I give $1, only 20 cents is going to go to what I'm actually giving to, about what I'm actually passionate about or what I actually care about or what I think actually needs to have a positive change. We're very upfront with what percentage goes into like the EarthFund platform fees. We're very upfront with what percentage goes back to the community, because the community does get rewarded for vetting the projects themselves. They do get rewarded for being involved within the DAO itself. So you have a pretty interesting mechanism and ecosystem there, and we can get further into that. But you can trace where the money goes from which wallet to what wallet. And we encourage all the communities to continue updating and saying, this is where the money is going. This is where it's going. And almost naturally, with the end users that are attracted to this type of project and platform, you're going to see, in my opinion, you're going to see the DAOs that are the most transparent, the ones that are updating the most, the ones that are showing the most, that are showing their ledgers. Those are going to be the ones that are really prolific and the ones that flourish, because this is what that community expects. It's not like before where people would give, and now you see a lot of these nonprofits, they're multi-billion-dollar nonprofits, and people just continue to give. And there's that veil, right? There's that mystery around what's actually happening. Now you can go in and you can search, if you know how to, you can actually go and see where these traditional nonprofits, how they're distributed, at least in the US, because all of that has to be publicly disclosed. But it's not that easy, right? It's not as easy as going into Etherscan and seeing, okay, this is where all that money moved. Okay, this is where the wallets went. And as we keep integrating the world more into Web3, then that open ledger starts becoming a lot more valuable and a lot more dynamic. And you start seeing where all these funds are headed. So again, building for the future and making sure that it is, I don't know, this isn't financial advice or anything, but making sure it is bear market proof, right? Where people are just already using these rails because it's what makes sense. It's the next obvious step.
Okay. And I guess I was a little bit confused, maybe not confused. So as a traditional Web2 philanthropic organization, if I move to Web3 using EarthFund's DAO platform, if I move to this Web3 platform, I would still need to encourage my existing donation base, I'm not sure if that's the proper term, to also move to Web3 with me in order to continue to contribute, if I'm not mistaken.
They can, but remember, the whole Web3 community is a completely different demographic in itself, right? And you can get into metrics and you can start going, but let's just grab the easiest one, which let's say it's 24-hour volume, right? Of trading of Ethereum, let's just say. When you look at the 24-hour volume, can that be done by one person? Yes. Realistically, is it? No, it's not. And you start looking at companies like Coinbase, right? Let's use a safe one. You look at companies like Coinbase and how many users they have, and you start looking into, again, this is probably not as safe, but OpenSea, right? And how often this volume is happening in OpenSea. And you start looking at all these metrics and you start seeing the true size of this community. And more importantly, you start seeing things like, I'm not name dropping, but Ukraine DAO, and you start seeing Constitution DAO, and you start seeing all of this, and you start seeing the influx of money into DAOs. I don't have the precise metrics. I looked it up about a couple weeks ago, but when you see the growth from DAOs from year over year, it was over 10x, 15x. And we're talking about something that I'm being conservative with, not only with monetary value, but also within users, within people that are becoming more involved with the community. So again, this is already becoming its own separate ecosystem. It is its own separate ecosystem, like we all know, and it's not the same user. You come across some resistance when you go into people who aren't current Web3 users and they're trying to transition into Web3, which we've noticed, and you see it within the world currently, where they're like skeptical, right? Why would I give Ether? Why would I give whatever, USDT or whatever? But when you start going more into the Web3 world where people are already used to using it, they're already making purchases with Ether, they're already trading NFTs, they're already buying crypto for multiple reasons, then it just makes sense, right? That's the next step. Now, if you go even further than that, and then you look at stable coins that are central banks, right? And what central banks are going to be giving per country, the US stable coin, let's say, or the Chinese stable coin, or maybe the Taiwanese stable coin, that has to run on a certain rail, right? That has to run on some type of platform. And the question is, which platform is that going to be? Now you start looking at different industries, right? There's the world of charity. There's the world of giving. Like we're discussing, we're one of the niches within that rail system. But then you start going into e-commerce and you start going into marketing and you start going into all these different things. The world is changing. And this isn't something that's 30 years down the line. This is something that's the next 5 years, 10 at the most. So what's the platform? And that's why we say we're building the giving economy.
Okay. And I guess to summarize for myself and maybe people who are listening, right? So maybe you're a philanthropic organization, you integrate Web3 through EarthFund on your website somewhere, right? Those people who are in Web2 are like, okay, now that my ABC organization is on this platform, I get to have an idea of where funds are going, right? And that's the advantage for me partaking in the Web3 community. But I can still, and this organization can still do both Web 2 and Web 3
absolutely,
while slowly transitioning to Web 3.
Yeah. When I started really getting heavy into the world of decentralization, I became a radical and I said, decentralization is the only thing. It is the future, right? It is, but it's the option. So whether people recognize it or not, you have an arms race between centralized entities and decentralized entities. And the decentralized ones took a hit with the whole FTX debacle and a couple other things. And we could get into that if we really want to. But the reality is at some point, the decentralized entities were making a huge leeway. A lot of money was being pumped into decentralized software, decentralized platform, DAO, everything decentralized. You had this versus mode And it's not one or the other. That's not the way it works, right? The world has a tendency to balance things out. And centralized entities started becoming very powerful. You look at banks, you look at governments, you look at all these things. So what happened is now decentralization became an option. And as decentralization becomes an option, and it's a viable one and a strong one, you have a balance between these centralized entities that say, wait, we have to consider this. And you start seeing it. You start seeing it within large corporations. You start seeing it within nonprofits. You start seeing it within governments. Wait, these systems that they're implementing, like there's a high demand for it. There's a market for this. And more importantly, it just makes more sense logistically. So.
Okay. Let's take a step back and coming back on script. Oh, yes.
I could get into these like tangents. So stop me, please. If you
No. That's the thing. It was not a tangent. It's just like, because I did want to ask this question as well, because I've been involved in crypto since about 2017 or so, not a long time, I would say. You guys place a big emphasis on DAOs. And again, this is just for me doing research before this show. And is there a specific reason for that? Because there are some people, DAOs are good, but there are some downsides to DAOs. So what is the big emphasis for DAOs as a philanthropic organizations, as opposed to putting something like a Kickstarter and saying, hey, I am ABC company in Australia and we give money to people who are homeless, give us money. Why not do that?
Well, let's pedal back to what you said about why people in Taiwan didn't give money to, or they were skeptical about giving money to charitable organizations. And a big part of that is because they felt like what they didn't matter, or if they didn't have a say in it. So that's why I believe that it makes sense to have DAOs for charitable causes and for world-changing causes. Because if I'm an owner of it, quote unquote, and I have a vote and I have a say, and I can see where the funds go. And not only that, I can get rewarded monetarily for being a part of that ecosystem. Doesn't that just make sense that people are going to feel more comfortable in giving? Like, yeah, of course, there's downsides to DAOs. Absolutely. I can get into that too. There's the governance structures for a lot of DAOs are awful. They just don't make sense. They want to go off the rails and we're going to vote on what the flavor of coffee is in the office and they get in their own way. But that's with any type of experimental governance, right? That's with any type of understanding. Now, the DAOs that have a good idea of what history is, those that don't know history are doomed to repeat it. The DAOs that understand governance and history, they can create good companies, organizations. They can create good corporations where people that have common interests come together and are empowered. And that's the whole thing, right? The whole point of Web3 really was to empower people. If you look at Bitcoin, it was started by a bunch of libertarians that just were like, we don't want the government. We don't want this. We don't want that. And like, we want to have an open ledger and we don't want to have the printing of money by the Federal Reserve and all this stuff. And might be misquoting a little bit, but that was the whole idea, right? That rebellious mentality of, hey, how are we going to do this? And how can we own this? And that's what I believe is the importance in this, right? So if you look at charitable giving and you look at empowerment and the ability to have a say within that charitable giving, I think it just makes sense. And I think that's really a good driver to promote more giving. So I just think that there's a really strong correlation there. Now, are DAOs the solution for everything? Some of my peers may say, I don't think so. Right? You get to a point where you need executives, right? You need a top series. You need people that execute. You need people that are boots on ground, but you have that in DAO structures. You have governors, you have reps, you have all these things. You use things for what they're useful for. And I really do wholeheartedly believe that DAOs can encourage people to be more charitable. And that's the point, right?
Another question I would have, so I'm just thinking about this as well, is, all right, again, going back to the example of somebody who has no experience, but they're like, okay, this sounds interesting. I live in a country where people are a bit skeptical about giving money to charitable organizations. All right, I'm going to go with this, but oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed. At EarthFund, do you guys advise on setting up?
Oh, yeah.
If I go onto your platform and I'm totally lost, is there somebody to contact and say, hey, can you help me with all of this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And that we're actually in the process of getting more funding for scaling too, because now we went from a company that was building something to a company that's supporting something that's been built. So a customer service side of things and a training and troubleshooting side of things. And we also offer that as a service, as a paid service. Okay. Again, I'm this medium-sized nonprofit and I want to figure out how to get into this. Here's this paid service. And that's like a monthly subscription, right? So yeah, there is help. We do plan on scaling that help even more with the funding that we're seeking. So make this as easy as possible for people to onboard. I truly believe that in 5 years, hopefully you and I will speak again a couple of times before then, but in 5 years, when you and I have a conversation, we're going to be like, wow, remember we were talking about this back then, that Rails were built then.
Okay. I made this script, I don't know how long ago, and I remember seeing 3 initiatives were funded on the site, right? So for people who go, and I remember you scroll down to somewhere about midway on your site, it might just be my browser as well. Once something is funded, what happens after that?
Yeah, so we highly encourage the communities to update regularly. What happened? What'd you do with that money? Obviously, you can track everything on Etherscan and see where it's been moved to. But besides that, let's get a couple stories, right? Because it's the easiest way to look at it. The community voted to fund a project. And by the community, I mean all the DAO members. And in this case, they were, let's use our largest example, which is the Never Alone DAO. The Never Alone DAO had at the time Never Alone tokens. They still have them. As the project gets funded, the token holders that were part of the community received a reward. And now I'm going to say something off cuff. I could be off by a couple percentage, but they received 7%, let's say, of the total amount that was funded towards the project. So that was divided between all the token holders, and they received a USDT reward for participating within the DAO. Now that happens automatically. That happens, it's just distributed. Once that gets distributed, then the rest goes into the donation wallet or into that cause wallet, let's say. That cause then works. The first one was actually artificial intelligence for suicide prevention and mental health and well-being. So it was called the Peewee bot. The Peewee bot works with text messaging, and if it gets really bad, they intervene with therapists, so specialists. That gets funded, and then they report back and say, hey guys, we've been working on Peewee. Peewee has successfully, I think the metric was like 10,000 interventions or 10,000 messages with users, different users. So I say, hey, we funded it. That's great. So now you have a community that's active. So now the next time that community says, hey, we want to fund this project, the community has trust in it, right? You've built trust within a community. Now, with everything, unfortunately, there comes times where there are people who are less honest, let's say. We've all come across that, right? That's just the way of the world. You have a community that's vetting people and saying, okay, who are the people that are involved in this? They have to KYC. So on our platform, they have to show their entire identity. They have to get verified before they can even try to propose a DAO. Once the DAO is proposed, the community can see it and they can vote towards it and say, we approve this. If it's something, again, that's respectable, it's connected to, let's say, the Chopra Foundation, it's connected to, I'm just going to say, because you said it, Red Cross, I know people feel some kind of way about them, plus or minus, but let's say Red Cross, we know that they're good to go. They're vetted on our platform. People can actually say, we really care about this. This is really important. Let's say the earthquake in Turkey, it's something that just happened. We want to feature this. The EarthFund DAO members actually can vote on what gets featured. So it's not like a paid by that entity or DAO or anything. They actually feature them and they say, hey guys, this is really important. Check in on this. And that way the community stays active and they keep participating. So there's a couple mechanisms in which you have a vetting process. There's a couple mechanisms in which you have this person's identification. You have to actually verify who you are with your license and ID, and it's all done automatically. It's an ongoing process, as I like to say. And as we get more and more case studies developed, you pivot and you say, okay, this worked really well. An example of that was when we launched the Never Alone tokens, they were on Uniswap. So they had a variable price. That's anti our platform, if you think about it, because what are people going to do? They're going to buy it before they come out or pre-release or whatever. It comes out and they're going to dump, and like you get into this whole cryptocurrency problem. So that had to be pivoted into, okay, this is going to be a 1-for-1. So you can buy it for, let's say, $1, and then when you sell it back, you sell it back for $1. So it's in somewhat of a stable coin, let's say, but all you're buying is the ability to have governance for that DAO. And again, you receive USDT rewards once projects get funded. So again, there's always going to be version 2s, version 3s, version 4s within all software and within all platform. But so far, we've had very successful 3 causes that have been successfully funded.
Nice. Looking at what you've funded as well, and actually there was actually 2 questions I wanted to ask. Let me go with the first question is, as we've been talking, and I'm thinking, and we've talked about some big name philanthropic organizations, charitable organizations, Red Cross, UNICEF. There's a whole bunch more in the world that do a lot of very good things. Do you guys imagine them coming to you for help, or would you eventually pitch them and say, hey, we're EarthFund, we can help you onboard a whole other bunch of users?
I think it's a healthy medium between both, right? I think I say this thankfully. There's a lot of people that want to change the world for a better light. And there are a lot of organizations and nonprofits. And if you look at year over year, I haven't checked 2022. But if you look year over year, giving has actually increased significantly. So people are interested in giving, people are interested in something bigger than themselves. I would just say, to get back to your point, before we get to that type of scale, I would like to ensure that everything is operating as a well-oiled machine. Now, that's not to say that things aren't working well from a technological standpoint or from a software standpoint. It just, there are still case studies that I would like to see develop on a smaller scale before we reach a nonprofit to that size. But to really answer that question, it just depends on how active the Web3 community is in the next 5 years. Because if the Web3 community keeps pushing the way that it did in the beginning of 2022 and the second half of 2021, these people are going to be begging for us to be involved within their projects. So it really just depends on how we are as a community. But again, things are done when they're supposed to be done. They're supposed to be done properly. And our company is a big proponent of that. And we're not ones to rush and be like, hey, you guys have to be this, you're chasing shiny objects. That's not the way it works. Like, let's make sure everything's really well oiled. Let's make sure that everything, all of our theses are solid. And then from there, we can start talking to the big guys, you know?
Now I remember what I wanted to ask is, like, you mentioned the story about never alone. Right? Yeah. And I love the story, and it's so cool. And I was wondering, for people who are listening, who want to hear about more of these stories, is there a video or media somewhere that they can listen to this story, or beyond the podcast, of course, like, is there a place on EarthFund where they can read about these stories, that some of the things that the projects you've funded are doing?
Yeah, so on the platform, you can see it for right now, you can see it on you could see it, but not on such a deep level. If you want to go further into it, you go into our Medium blog post. And our team has done a really good job of being very descriptive on Medium, talking about the updates, like what things are looking like on a monthly basis. At some point, we were doing weekly Medium updates. So you were seeing where the money was going. You were seeing why we chose certain organizations to work with them for our case studies. If anybody really wants to dive deep, just Google Medium EarthFund and you can see all of the blog posts. It's really fascinating because you see a history of the platform and like all the trials and tribulations that we faced up to this point, and also all the successes. So I would highly encourage them, just Google Medium EarthFund.
Okay, no, they won't have to Google. If you're listening or watching the video, yep, just click down on the link on the YouTube channel or on your podcast app, and you guys can have a look.
There you go. Even better. Thank you.
I'm going to have a look as well, because I'm like, I was looking, like, you explained the story, but this is really interesting. And I guess this goes on to my next question. Is, I live in Taiwan, right? And Taiwan is a really wonderful place, but I'm originally from South Africa. And anyone who knows anything about South Africa knows South Africa has a bunch of issues, including 20-something% unemployment. We've had a whole bunch of stuff in the last 2 or 3 years or so. You mentioned KYC. So as far as I know, with KYC, some platforms support KYC no matter where you live. They're like, okay, give us your passport if you're not American. So they can check out my South African passport or my Taiwanese ID. And so with EarthFund, are you strictly limited to American philanthropic organizations for the moment? Or?
No, we've had successfully KYC people internationally.
Oh, okay.
I could start naming countries that I know has been KYC. Like, we've done Japan, we've done UAE, we've done the US, we've done Canada, we've done a couple African countries, we've done a bunch of places in Europe. So the third party that we use for KYC hasn't had an issue with anybody that I'm aware of. India, we've done people in India. Yeah, people from all over the world.
Oh, that's great, because that I've talked to so many like really cool ideas and projects and companies on the podcast, and I'm always dismayed towards the end of the show. Like, yep, we're launching in the States and Europe, or we're launching in the States and Canada, but it's good. EarthFund is pretty much
and
when it comes to KYC.
Yeah, we've actually worked with an organization out of, I believe they're in Ghana.
Nice.
So yeah, we worked directly with them. We funded, the platform funded their projects, and we worked with the US obviously. And we've worked with, it's crazy because our team was international. While we were doing these sprints of building out the platform, like I said, we had people in Japan, we had people in Korea, we had people in Australia, there were people in India, there were people in, I'm forgetting a bunch of countries, of course, Greece, the US, Canada, UK, all these people were from all around the world, Russia, even Ukraine. So we had Russia and Ukraine working together on the platform. And it was crazy because it was right during the conflict too. So it was, some people were living in Russia, some at the beginning, and some were in Ukraine. And some of the coders were literally like picking up AKs and defending homeland and then coming back and programming for the platform. So I'm not, by the way, I'm not like encouraging violence to anybody, not at all. I'm just actually stating the history of the platform. So seeing all these people come together, we really are an international community working together to get this done. So yeah, it was like, okay, that's a must for any third party that we work with. If our team is international, anybody that wants to come on board, and it just goes into that philosophy of giving without borders, right? So if I only live in the US and I can only fundraise for things in the US, like, how is that different from cash? And I don't mean to speak poorly about other projects that you've spoken about or anything, but that's the whole idea, right? The big sell of crypto is you can do it across the world. You don't need the banks to do it. So if you can fund something in Nigeria from the US and a Nigerian organization can promote it and talk about it and people from all over the world can fund it, that's the whole point, right?
That is exactly the whole point. And it's the transparency aspect that we've talked about already is such a big thing. And like I said, funding from everywhere. And it's such a good thing the world needs. And I'm not going to hammer this point away because we've already talked about it. Coming to more the infrastructure, you mentioned Ethereum and you talked about this as well, on the part that I'm going to edit out anyway, is you guys are on Ethereum, right? And Ethereum at the moment, the market's looking pretty nice. But back in 2021, 2022, Ethereum was expensive. Gas fees were expensive. Do you guys have a plan to mitigate the transaction costs that are gonna happen at some point in the future when crypto does rebound to the Ethereum 4K levels again?
Yeah, from my understanding with sharding and a lot of these updates, like it's gas is never going to be like it was at its crisis, let's call it. The reason that Ethereum was chosen, it's the gold standard. So if you're going to build, again, a future-proof system, if you're going to build rails for something, you use the gold standard. You don't go with a company that's like the silver or a company that's the bronze, like a network, let's say, that's the bronze. If you just look at Ethereum, they did a hot swap and they did it without affecting any transactions. That is remarkable. Like, people don't understand. We saw history. They changed the network in front of our very eyes without pausing it, and they did it flawlessly. So that's the type of network that I want to run the future on. That's the type of network that I want to make sure. Is there a downside to things? Yeah, at some point the downside was gas fees. Absolutely. Without naming other networks, there are networks that crash for an entire day. There are networks that they get stuck. There are networks that they're just very clunky. So if you're going to build something, you're going to invest this time and money and energy and effort and resources and manpower and woman power, people power into building this thing. You got to build it on the standard. You have to build it on the thing that makes this the most sense to build it on. And for us, Ethereum was the clear choice.
That's a good argument as well. I guess you mentioned a lot of good things that are coming this year. The Shanghai upgrade is like next month, I believe, for Ethereum. So it does make sense. I would say if we were having this conversation a year ago, I think that would be an issue. But as you're saying, so even if gas prices do shoot up, you are, like you said, on the gold standard, which makes a lot of sense for people. And I think most people, even if you're not into crypto, you would have heard of this thing called Ethereum at some point, and that lends some sort of feeling of trust to the network.
When we started this project, and not to interrupt you, but we started this project about a year and a half ago, maybe closer to 2 years now. And at the time, like you mentioned, it was like, wow, Ethereum's super expensive to transact on. Is this the thing to do? And there was no doubt, because you don't build things based on current conditions. Things take time to build. Like there's a famous bridge that they're building here in Miami. And if they were to build it thinking about today's conditions instead of the one from 5 years or 20 or 30 years from now, projects, they wouldn't be completed. They would be awful. So you have to think about, okay, with the information that I have, what's the forecast? What is this going to look like in the next 3 years, in the next 5 years? What is this going to look like a year from now? A lot of careful consideration went into that when we were choosing which network to build on. Now, that's not to be said that in the future, it's not going to be multi-network. It's not going to be available across networks. But if you're going to build on one, like I said, choose the gold standard. Choose the one that has proven time and time again that it's the one. It's the best.
Yeah, no, that is true. And I started off, got into crypto through Ethereum, so I definitely cannot disagree with that. All right, Alex, I'm trying to keep these podcasts shorter, and we've answered pretty much everything that I planned for today, just not in order, which is totally cool. I always like to give guests a chance at the end. If there's anything else you want to plug, you want to mention, anything that you'd like to talk about that I haven't asked you at all. Again, time is no limit. Like the floor is yours. What would you like to end up today's show?
Yeah, please make sure that, like we said earlier, do your own research and check out earthfund.io. That's our website. Check out the platform, interact with it. Also, if you want to see what we're talking about, check us out on Twitter at earthfund_io. Check me out on Twitter at the Alex Vergara. I'm not super active, but if you have questions about the platform, please make sure to reach out to me and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. If not, I'll direct you to someone to the team that can answer better than I can. And for those listening, the question that we always get is, what do I invest in? Everybody, it doesn't matter what you're talking about, that they want to know, what do I invest in? Give me the inside source. Always invest your time in learning, right? Invest your time in learning about these networks, invest your time in seeing what these things are going to be building in the future. Don't look at today, look at 5 years from today. And I'm super thankful for everybody for listening and participating in this podcast. And I'm thankful to you as well.
Thank you as well, Alex. I really appreciate it. This is it's like the perfect way to start when people like you and some of your co-founders at EarthFund are building things like this. Again, somebody who was born in Africa and has seen how it's changed and it's gotten a lot better, but it still needs a lot of help, and not just South Africa, but like lots of countries around the world. And I'm really thankful to what you guys are doing, because I know it's something that's much needed with a lot of turmoil that's going on in the world. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys are doing. And one very quick last question. What is the best place? Like, someone listening to this podcast is, okay, I'm really interested in this. I might not have some money at the moment because of job insecurity, etc. But I do want to keep up to date. So when I am stable, I can start to donate again. I can follow EarthFund on its journey as it's moving around. Well, like, is it Twitter to follow? Do you guys are on YouTube? Do you have your own EarthFund podcast? Like, what's the best place?
Yeah, I would definitely follow us on Twitter and check out our Telegram channel too. If you go to our Twitter, you can see information regarding Telegram. But if you don't want to be as involved as Telegram can be, check us out on Twitter. It's the best place. We update every single day. We have something talking about relevant news, something about the platform, and just come check us out and say hi.
Cool. Then I will make sure Telegram and Twitter, everything else is going to be there in the show notes. And thank you for that last note. And this will really be the end of the podcast.
Awesome.
Alex, thank you. I'm going to hold you to your word, because I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing. Not sure in the beginning when I was saying, but damn, I'm sold 150% in, and I appreciate it. And I will, hopefully I'll hold you to your word. Maybe we can talk again. So it's about February, at least in about another 6 months or so, to see where you guys are version wise and how things are going, and we can catch up there.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today, and I hope you have an awesome day. I know it's morning over there, so enjoy yourself today. Have a great morning.
You too.